So our agenda for today starts with a welcome and introduction from MAPC's Executive Director, Mark Drayson, and then Christian Brandt, MAPC's Interim Community Engagement Director, will give a brief presentation on equitable community engagement before we hear from our wonderful guest speakers who have joined us for this discussion today. And then after, we'll head into breakout rooms for some Q&A, and then we'll come back to the main Zoom room to wrap up. So thanks again for joining us. I will stop sharing my screen and I'll pass it on to Mark.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. I want to start with a few thank yous. I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Mark Drayson. I'm the Executive Director of MAPC. I want to start by thanking Francelli's, who really has played a leadership role in developing this webinar and in spearheading much of our work on the intersection between climate change and equity. I also want to thank other members of our staff, Julia Nasser, in the Clean Energy Department, along with Francelli's, Christian Brandt, who's going to speak in a few moments, Sharon Ron, and the other folks at our Public Health Department, and many other folks at MAPC who have been actively engaged on the issue and on the programming for this morning. You know, I feel, one more thank you. I want to thank also our partners at the state, particularly the DOER Green Communities program, and also our partners at the Bar Foundation, who have provided a lot of the resources that are enabling us to do this work. It has become, I think, almost trite, because you hear it so frequently, to say that climate change hurts most low-income communities and communities of color. We know that's true in the United States. We know that it is even more graphically true in other parts of the world, particularly in the lowest income parts of the world. But what is discussed much less is that our best efforts to mitigate climate change and to establish resilience also have costs and benefits. And if we are going to, in a just way, try and mitigate climate change and try and adapt and establish greater resilience, it's critical that at every step of the way, we involve the people that are most effective, the most affected. I guess I could say both. They are both the most affected, and they are probably the most effective at telling us what can be done to address these issues. It is also critical that we make sure that the benefits of mitigation and adaptation are fairly distributed, and the costs of mitigation and adaptation are fairly distributed. And that word fairly needs to take into account not simply the question of who has the most and who has the least, not simply the question of who is the most affected by climate change and who the least, but also a clear analysis of historical, political, and financial inequity that led to a great deal of our climate change and led to the fact that its burdens are not equally distributed in this country or in the world. At MAPC, we're always guided by our regional plan, which we adopt approximately once every 10 years. Most recently, about a year and a half ago, Metro Common 2050, Shaping the Region Together. And our regional plan, you know, to some degree, it is implemented by big policy ideas, passing bills at the legislature, creating new programs. But we like to say that most of our work involves trying to implement Metro Common, one neighborhood, one town, one city at a time, through the local planning and implementation work that honestly most of our staff spend most of their time working on. And so some of our highlights today are going to be local efforts to try and ensure the kind of equity in climate change that I was talking about a few moments ago. I think we can all learn from these efforts. There have been successes. There have also been challenges. The efforts are ongoing. They're not finished. The work is never finished. But it's not our responsibility to finish it. It's our responsibility to keep it going and always make sure that every day we're making progress. I know that that's what's represented by our work here at MAPC, and I know that it's what's represented by the speakers who are going to present today. I'm so proud and pleased that we're having this event and that we're doing this work. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to either Francelli's or Christian, who's ever taking up next.
Thanks, Mark. I think that is me, unless Francelli's, you had something you wanted to say. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Christian Brandt. I am the current Interim Director of Community Engagement at MAPC. I'm very excited to be joining you today. And before I share my screen, I just want to say I'm going to, Francelli's asked the Community Engagement Department to share a little bit about the work that we do at the agency, how we think about equitable community engagement, and then also some examples from our work. So I'm gonna get us started with that. I'm really excited to hear from our wonderful panelists. And I think something that you might notice throughout this conversation is that there's no one way to do community engagement, and all of us will be doing something unique and different, and really sort of tailored to the type of communities that we're working with and the needs that they have. So I'm gonna get us started on a short presentation. Give me 1 second. All right. I will try my best to answer questions in the chat, but I'm working off of one screen, so I can't show them without blocking the screen. So I will try to get to some of those afterwards. But this is the current Community Engagement Department. There's myself. We have a sub-regional programs manager named Sasha Parodi, and 2 community engagement specialists, Naji Nunley and Gloria Wangpu. So our department is guided by 4 key values: equity, accountability, empowerment, and accessibility. And for this meeting, I just want to share a little bit about what we mean by equity. So the first definition, which I'm not going to read, comes from the agency's conception of equity that we developed through through our regional plan update, Metropolitan 2050. The second definition is how the engagement department specifically thinks about equity within community engagement. So and I will read this out. So we define equitable community engagement as the practice of using diverse and numerous strategies to provide opportunities for all residents, but especially those who have been historically excluded from planning processes or are underrepresented and under-resourced, to be informed and to participate in public planning and decision-making processes to achieve equitable outcomes. And I want to specifically mention that we think about this as being informed and participating in public planning and decision-making processes that impact their daily lives. So at MAPC, we operate off of a sort of 5-step community engagement model. Like I mentioned at the beginning, there's no one way to think about community engagement. And if you Google community engagement, you will find probably 50 different models that all sort of intersect. Like the Venn diagram isn't a full circle, but they all overlap in some way or another. And this is the one that the Community Engagement Department at MAPC uses. So we generally think about our engagement work as involving 5 steps. The first is identifying the purpose of engagement. And so that's really specifically about making sure that you understand for yourself why you are even doing engagement with people in the community in the first place. The second is understanding who you are needing to, wanting to, required to, depending on what kind of work you're doing, to engage. And then the subsequent parts are all about thinking about what resources you have access to, sort of the scale and breadth of the type of engagement that you want to be doing, developing a communication strategy, a messaging strategy. And then finally, this is the part where people tend to start with this last one, but getting to what actual tactics and approaches you will use. So this is where you think about, like, do I need to be doing focus groups? Should I be doing one-on-ones? Should I be doing any of those things? So for the purpose of this meeting, I spoke too soon. This is for those of you who are more visually oriented. This is an example of that process as a iterative circle. So it's a little crowded visually, but we're hoping that this sort of conveys that the work is an ongoing thing that happens all the time. It's work that we're actively engaged in throughout the relationships that we're building. And it happens in a non-linear way. So it's not necessarily, you know, developing the purpose doesn't, and then identifying stakeholders doesn't always lead to resources. Sometimes you go back and think about the purpose again once you've started thinking about who you want to talk to. So for the purpose of this meeting, I wanted to share specifically some examples that we developed through the Lexington Climate Action Plan, Community Engagement Plan, which we really worked on to support the initial phase 1 of Lexington's Climate Action Plan. And I'm going to focus specifically on the purpose of engagement in the stakeholder analysis, especially because I think the purpose of engagement is really, in my experience and in the work that MAPC does, it is the most important thing to identify. And then the stakeholder analysis, I think, gets at a lot of the questions that Francelli shared with me from those of you who've submitted them when you were registering. So the purpose of engagement is really about identifying the reason for the engagement in the first place. And I guess I should say reasons, because there could be many. And I just wanted to share an example from the Lexington Climate Action Plan. So we knew that, you know, part of the engagement would be communicating with people, just making sure that the broader public had clear and accessible information about climate mitigation and resilience in Lexington, that it was compelling, that it really spoke to the things that mattered to them. And so that was a really core component of how we thought about the engagement work that we wanted to do, and the information that we wanted to provide. Of course, unsurprisingly, engaging key stakeholders is the second part of the purpose for this project. I would be surprised if you had an engagement strategy that didn't involve engaging people, but you know, never say never. But yeah, so this is really about identifying, like, being particular, thinking about targeted engagement. You know, obviously there's climate change and mitigation and resilience work is really important for everybody to be involved in. But as Mark was saying earlier, it's especially important that we think about using the engagement work of a process to really address historical exclusion in these types of decision-making efforts. And then, you know, something that I really like to think about is, like, you know, MAPC and Lexington in this case, there's certainly lots of information and knowledge that our two institutions bring to this work. But that information and knowledge is only useful when it's developed in collaboration with other people, especially residents. And residents, community members, key stakeholders, they come to these processes with lots of really important and crucial information about how things work on the ground, what impacts are on the ground, and that's not necessarily something that institutions always have a great handle on. And so one of the key parts of this effort was to really focus on developing a collective base of knowledge, one that everyone participates in developing and creating, and happens through co-engagement, you know, working together, learning together, and identifying places of shared knowledge and concern. And then we also know, you know, like, MAPC is a non-regulatory public agency, so we don't often step into the implementation of these types of plans. That's usually something that's done by the community or the municipality in question. And we, you know, provide lots of support and assistance in doing that work, but ultimately implementing things like climate action plans falls to the key stakeholders and the community and the town. And so part of our purpose of engagement for this process, at least, was working to develop the tools and resources and capacity. They would help MAPC, like understanding what we could do to help empower stakeholders, but also hearing from stakeholders what they might need that they don't have access to or don't already have, that could help support their work to follow up on and implement some of the things involved in this action plan. And I know that there's some stuff in the chat, so I will try to get to those towards the end. But I also just wanted to move on to a little bit to stakeholder analysis. So this is usually the second part of our process. And I think this speaks to some of the questions that folks have about knowing who to engage and when to engage them and what would speak most to people, and really thinking about like who, of all the people in your community, who are the ones that are impacted by this the most, answering those types of questions. So on the left, you can see a screenshot of a power mapping activity. It is an example. The city of Boston open space and recreation plan doesn't exist. And so all of these individuals are sort of come from a case study that we developed to help facilitate this. But really, this analysis is thinking about who in the community is likely to be involved in this process or should be involved in this process, who isn't, what type of support, how supportive of this project might they be? And then how influential are they in the process? So are they a decision maker? Who ultimately is going to be making decisions in this community about the content or information or recommendations developed in this process? And really thinking about, that on this type of access. The platform that we use to do this virtually is called Jamboard. It's a free product of Google. It's really, generally speaking, user-friendly, and I'm happy to share an example of this with Franceli so that she can share that out with all of you. But this is a really useful way of thinking about like going a little bit beyond just simply listing out the stakeholders that you have, but thinking more specifically like who are the actual people in this community and how might they become involved in this process? How should we think about their involvement? How would they think about their involvement? Really, the goal of this is to try and put yourself into the shoes of these community stakeholders. And then the other thing I just wanted to share a little bit is this Lexington stakeholder list that we developed in a product called Airtable. It's like a sort of cloud-based fancy Excel. You can access it for free, but of course it's limited in terms of functionality. But this is just a really great way to develop, simply a list of who the stakeholders are that you might have. I do think, something that we really try to think about for the Lexington Climate Action Plan is that MAPC is an agency, sometimes we come into projects and we're working with communities, but we don't have as deep connections in the community as some folks who are doing this work on the ground have. And so we really worked in this process to facilitate some workshops. On the left, you can see a stakeholder mapping workshop with the Climate Action Plan working group. And then on the right, you can see a screenshot of a facilitation plan for a youth forum. And both of these were really intended to sort of connect with key community members to really understand how they see their own community and what they see as an important part of or important stakeholders to involve, or an important way to think about the stakeholder analysis of this. I'm going to move on to the next slide, but before I do that, I think just something else that the Community Engagement Department does for every project that we're on is a sort of entry-level demographic analysis of the community that we're working in. I think it's worth pointing out that, census data and ACS data it's not a sort of panacea. It's really not the only thing that you should be relying on to make decisions. Or to inform yourself about who is in a community. But it is a useful place to start. And it has provided us with a really great way of sort of giving us the knowledge to be able to get started on thinking about like, well, if these are the people that we know, and this is what the census is saying, where's the gap between that? So it is a useful data point. we try to include that in all of our work. So I want to move on. I know that was kind of quick, but I know we have a lot to talk about with this session. And so I just wanted to share a little bit of some of our resources that we have available to you that you can use. So if you have questions, if you are interested in working with the Community Engagement Department, you can contact us at communityengagement@mapc.org. That is probably the fastest way to get in touch with us. The beginning slide also has our individual contact information, but this is kind of like, you know, the vessel for reaching all of us. And then the other thing I just wanted to share is that we have a slew of resources available on our webpage on the MAPC website, and you can see that link there. It is mapc.org/community engagement. Some of the resources I've linked here, so if when Francelli shares out the presentation, we'll be able to share that information with you. But there's lots of stuff on here about virtual and hybrid engagement, which obviously we haven't talked about. Our community engagement strategy guide, which is a much more detailed version of what I just shared, as well as information about the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Municipal Coalition Guide, which is a product of the Massachusetts DEI Municipal Coalition. I also thought I would plug that we're hiring a community engagement director. That link is shared here, and so I thought I would bring that to all of your attention as well. As community engagement minded folks, hopefully you can share that far and wide. I think that is it for me, so I'm going to stop my presentation. And I know that there were some questions in the chat, so I really appreciate it that people were posting. And we can end there. I think I went over, Francelli, so I'm so sorry.
No, that's all right. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Christian. It was great to hear, you know, about community engagement model and to walk through the Lexington Community Engagement Plan to understand the process. And I know the resources you outlined will be really helpful for our audience. So yeah, as Christian noted, we'll be sure to share those resources and the presentation with everyone after the event. Let's see if I can bring on guest speakers onto my screen. I'll share so you can all see who we have with us today. Oh, awesome. Okay. So yeah, so now we'll get a chance to hear from all of our guest speakers who are doing some great community engagement work in their communities as well. So first up, we will have Niri Kumar, who is a Natick resident and a climate equity community liaison. So I'll stop sharing my screen so we can have Niri pinned to ours.
Hi, everyone. I'm Niri. So when I was asked to be a speaker, I said yes, because I've learned from Shonda Rhimes, say yes and figure it out later. And then I started to see everybody's background and I thought, what am I doing here? Everybody's doing such amazing work in different communities. And I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm the right place, but I'm still saying yes. And then I started hearing everything today so far from MAPC and what exactly we're discussing. And I'm like, I'm at the right place. That's the thing. I think it's about knowing who needs to be at the table, who needs to be in a part of the conversation. So I'm going to give you a quick background of why I care and why I'm in it. I'm actually from South Africa and I grew up in the apartheid era. So in my bones, equity is important to me. I've watched bias and I've lived under it, and I've lived watching racism as part of my life, and I've lived in segregation. So I know exactly what it feels like to be on the other side. So that's why equity is important to me. I became an engineer and I moved here about 20 odd years ago. And it was only until I moved to Natick that I noticed that they had a huge part of working, sustainability and going green. And although I was always involved in community work, part-time from being an engineer, I knew that we had to marry the two somehow. And so when I was asked whether I'd be a community liaison, especially because I run a local South Asian group in Natick, I said yes. And it's been a learning experience, learning for me more about climate equity, because, honestly, as much as I care about the climate, I normally roll my eyes every time people talk about it, because I feel it comes from a very elitist point of view, and it comes from a place of privilege where people can worry about that. But when I heard climate equity, I knew I had to be involved because it married two of my worlds. Because I genuinely feel like not just in the space, in most spaces, the people who should be talking aren't at the table. And either people can't speak because there are certain voices who are always very loud and very prominent, or people don't see representation. People don't see them. People can't talk if there's people not like them at the table. And so I felt like I'm very confident in speaking. I also feel I have a responsibility to speak up and use my voice as much as I can. And as I started working in this, it's been nice to see that it's been amazing. Firstly, I know I'm totally biased, and this is hosted by MAPC, and it sounds like an advert for them, but working with MAPC and work coming from the corporate world was a huge difference of learning that there were people who actually wanted to hear. There were people who didn't believe totally in hierarchy. There were people who went in and saw that we should be listening to people from different backgrounds and so forth, because there was something to learn from everyone. So anyway, as I started working with this, although I entered working because I ran the South Asian group in Natick, I realized that if I want to do this right, I need to do it where I was not only talking on behalf of people who looked like me. I realized that equity and diversity is not just only about color, and especially about my color, because there's other colors out there. While I have experiences as a brown person, it's different from a black person or a person who comes from a different economic background. So I decided that I was going to step out a little further than that and start to look carefully around me, because I wanted voices that were not just like mine. And so when I went to the gym, I realized in a sea of white people, there was one black woman. And so I approached her and I said, hey, can we talk about what your experiences are? And so when we had the in-depth climate conversation, she was part of it. And then I started noticing that I kept on giving a ride to my daughter's friend for cross country. And I asked them, well, how come you always need a ride? And they said, well, they don't have a car. And then I realized, well, hold it. There are people out there that don't have a car. And there are people out there who can't afford to have a car and have two jobs, so they barely can make ends meet. So that means if I didn't give the kid a ride, he wouldn't get to a lot of the activities, which is not fair. I mean, we all go to the same school, they pay taxes too. So something here was not right. So I invited them to the conversation. And it was eye-opening to me. And as we started having these in-depth climate conversations, we realized there's a lot more at play. There's a lot of things that we need to rethink. We can't just talk about climate without noticing who's at the table, who's part of the conversation, and making sure that all other voices are heard. I always feel like learning is a lot about unlearning more than about actually learning, because, we also have to check off the biases that we have. And that's been a very learning experience as such. But so anyway, that's me. And at the moment, I just started because I'm in love with making sure everybody in the community gets to work. I started this week working as an energy advocate with the towns of Natick and Framingham. And that's my goal, I guess, for life, is working on making sure that there's a lot of voices that are heard, and not only is there a platform for them to hear it, but there's space for it, because it's really, unless you're the other, you don't notice it. you don't notice it, because a lot of people say, well, I don't notice it. Well, then that means you, the norm, and you, the typical person who's there. But when recently I was helping a high school with talking about their climate action, and it was only since I sat in the room and I saw 4 white people. I mean, they don't notice it because they're passionate about what they do, but it's really hard to talk about equity when everybody looks the same and you look different. It's really hard to tell people that we might need to look carefully about where we're not the norm. And if the people at the table are not different, we can't talk about other issues too, because they need to be at the table. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Niri. It was great to hear about your journey and about the work that you've been able to do in Natick, as well as the importance of positionality and perspectives when doing this work. And congrats on your energy advocate role. I know you'll do great. So next we will hear from Marlees West Owayda, the Community Engagement Manager for the City of Cambridge's Community Development Department, and Lindsay Diaz, a co-leader of the Community Engagement Team for the Department of Human Service Programs for the City of Cambridge. So I'll pass it on over to you both.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Diaz. I'm Community Engagement Manager for the Community Engagement Team with the Department of Human Services Programs. Just a little bit about myself before I get into our model. I'm kind of new to Cambridge. I started this position in 2021, and I used to work and do family community engagement work for the Hartford Public School System. That's where I'm originally from, Hartford, Connecticut. And so when I was applying for jobs, I was really attracted to this role and the community engagement team model, because I really could see how the city of Hartford could really benefit if they duplicated this model. So I love this model, just being biased. But enough about me. My team sits at the Department of Human Services Programs. We use a lot of acronyms, so I might refer to our team as CET at DHSP. And we're a team of 13. Both teams represent 6 linguistic communities, as well as the American-born Black community. And a little bit of background info about the model. Community engagement team was created about 20 years ago, and the task was really to connect underheard, underserved, and historically excluded families to events and resources that could benefit them and hopefully enrich their lives. Recently, within the last 3 years, we actually added a new community engagement team for a different department, which Marlees oversees.
Good morning. It's still morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Marlees West Owayda. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Community Engagement Manager for the Community Development Department for the City of Cambridge. We have 5 programmatic divisions in the Community Development Department. And a year ago in July, we created a Community Engagement Team, or CET at CDD, as you probably could have guessed at this point. A little bit about me. I grew up in Cambridge. I went to Cambridge Public Schools. I am a youth worker and a social worker. And I didn't know very much about planning before taking this job, but I was really motivated by the conversations I was having in my community, where people who had lived in Cambridge, grown up in Cambridge, worked in Cambridge, felt like Cambridge was changing and they didn't know how or why or have any way to get involved. And so that's what drew me to this position. Like I said, a year ago, we created a community engagement team operating on the same model, having part-time outreach workers who are leaders in their community, really focusing on connecting community members who are underheard, underserved, and historically excluded to the resources that the Community Development Department offers, but also to the planning processes. So we do a lot of work, not just on environmental work, but on all 5 of our programmatic divisions to think about how we can reach communities. And we intentionally think of those communities not as being hard to reach, which is sometimes what people say, but as being like I always say, hard to reach for who? It might be hard to reach for us, but that's because we need to do some trust building and some relationship building. And I'll pass it back to Lindsay to talk more about the model.
All right, thank you. So the CET model is unique and operates under 3 buckets. The first one that I'll talk about is outreach, right? And we do our outreach by hiring community members that are already leaders in their community. They are demonstrating their leadership abilities within the schools or in church organizations. We hire our outreach workers to be reflective of the City of Cambridge demographics. And I just lost my train of thought.
Well, so it's based on, like, when we talk about underserved, we look at the demographics of the city, and then we look at who is not represented currently in programming,
Right.
to start with.
Right, yes. And our outreach workers are our experts, right? We do all our work through them. We provide, so when I said we do the work in buckets, we do outreach, we provide technical assistance, and we do, what am I thinking out here?
Networking events.
Networking events, which fall under technical assistance, so sorry. Yeah, and so we pride ourselves on being cultural translators. And so we're able to provide a different lens when we're working with providers and departments when trying to schedule or plan outreach events. For example, this year, Ramadan happened to take place during parent-teacher conferences. And so we received feedback from our Bangla outreach workers that it was too difficult to schedule conferences during this time. It was very hard for them and their families to schedule an appointment. And so we provided that feedback back to central office at Cambridge Public Schools to think about that in the future. Some additional technical assistance that we do is a training program called Making Connections. And Making Connections is a 7-week training program where we really focus on building trust and working with community members. We cover topics such as race and equity, boundaries, self-care, and finding resources. Our whole point of that is really making sure that we are building up the community members that we're working with. And networking events. So we host a series of networking events throughout the year that we use as professional development, in which we cover topics that could be beneficial to providers that are looking to serve folks of Cambridge. We've covered topics such as plain language, learning about specific demographic groups. If we have certain groups coming in, we'll have an outreach worker do a presentation on the Ethiopian community and various topics. It's really whatever the need is, whatever we have a collaborative group that we work with, and we come together monthly and we talk about different needs that we're seeing in the community. And so we'll come up with a professional development training for that topic.
And so we really hold in all things that this is a practice of experts collaborating with experts. I think sometimes in community engagement gets like, I see it in like proposals or RFPs all the time, it gets shoved on as like a thing at the end rather than a true skill set and muscle that we have to work and practice and can have experts in. So we really hold that we are subject matter experts, our project managers coming together with our CETs, our teams, who are experts in their communities in which outreach strategies might be most effective and in some of that messaging that Christian talked about. A lot of that prep work actually happens before the outreach teams are even brought in. So we require that project managers communicate in all their communications with us and with CET in plain language. And I think a plain language resource will appear in the chat for you shortly. But that has been a really important practice for us to hold, because like when I started here at CDD, I didn't know what a corridor was. I thought that was a hallway, right? Like there's a way that we need to be thinking throughout the process. How are we communicating in ways that people actually understand? So some of that work happens with Lindsay and I, with project managers, kind of in the like planning stage before we bring it to the outreach team for feedback and outreach, to make sure that the outreach workers aren't having to duplicate the same work again and again. This also means that we think about accessibility and like in terms of visually, is a flyer easy to read? Is the contrast enough so that we're able to see it? Now a contrast tool that might appear in the chat for you as well. And especially with our climate work that CET at CDD has done, we have to be really aware that this is not the only thing on community members' plates. And so we've had situations where we've been doing outreach for a climate project and we've had to pause because a crisis happened in our community and it was no longer appropriate to keep advocating or recruiting for that non-urgent project when there was something actually really urgent happening in the community. And that's based on feedback that we get from outreach workers. It also, I think, is important to note too that it takes capacity building on both sides. So we do a lot of work with project managers around communicating clearly and slowly and really highlighting the why, and then truly and honestly being open to feedback. On the other end, we do a lot of work with outreach workers to feel comfortable and to create a container in which they really can give feedback and can be celebrated as experts. But that means that we really have to be flexible in our approach. Not any one outreach strategy or any one tool or program is going to reach everyone. And so we intentionally seek out different kinds of engagement strategies and different levels of commitment. I also think it's really important to note that sometimes it is that outreach worker feedback that is highly impactful. Recently, the outreach workers gave feedback and really overhauled the call for memberships for a climate committee. And they saw, even though our outreach ended up being truncated because of an event that happened in the community, we actually saw like a huge change in who applied for the committee. And it was really different than in times past. And that was because like they had fine-tooth combed that language to make it accessible. I think oftentimes we assume that we know what the why for community members is going to be. And actually we need to be listening to experts and hearing from them what about this will resonate. I've seen some chatter too about youth engagement. And that's a big piece of feedback that I hear again and again from outreach workers in climate work and in energy work, is that it's young people who are really in their communities resonating with this and interested in this. And so we also talk a lot about how can we expand our engagement to be less adult focused or to be youth welcoming. And I often find myself asking, like, does that really need to be 18 plus? Can we think about how we might involve some of our youth leaders too, and be intentional about broadening who we're welcoming in when we do this outreach and not assuming that we know who's going to care about something. Lastly, I'll just say, and please feel free to chime in, but lastly, I'll just say that transparency and collaboration is so important. We're technically in different departments with different teams, but we work together quite often and have really seen the power. Because if you go to a community member to talk about a specific topic, if you're building trust, they might tell you that they need childcare. And so it's so important that then we don't need to know all the answers, but we do need to know who and where to send them to next, so that we're not kind of just only able to meet the topic that we're interested in or the need that we're interested in learning about. That was me pausing. I'm passing it back now.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Marlees and Lindsay. It's very nice to hear about your collaboration doing this work, your commitment to linguistic diversity, and how you center the expertise of community outreach workers as community experts, while also prioritizing capacity building, which is really important. And, I also really loved your note on cultural translators and the importance of having that context and keeping that in mind when doing events to engage the community, as well as centering the needs of the community. So now we'll be hearing from Gail. So Gail Latimore is the Executive Director of Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation. So I'll pass it on to you, Gail. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Francelis, and good to be here. I'm really impressed listening to the previous speakers. We don't have a model, so to speak, for our engagement work. It's pretty organic, but I think as I listen to all the previous speakers, we're implementing different aspects of that model. So I'm Gail Latimore, Executive Director of Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation in Dorchester, Massachusetts. And we are a community development corporation that is pretty comprehensive in its scope. We do affordable housing as a core line of business. So we have about 1,000 units of affordable housing in our portfolio. But we're also very much involved in a range of other lines of business, including environmental justice issues. So we offer both direct service programming, like connecting people to energy retrofits, et cetera. Also offer a lot of advocacy and organizing work that's core to what we do. And so we take an organizing approach to our engagement. And I'm going to look at my notes as I'm talking so that I cover everything. But in terms of engagement, our strategies and work include when we're talking to people, starting with not just the environmental and climate justice issues, which obviously are important for all of us. We all need clean air, clean water, et cetera. But the folks are busy, they're trying to make ends meet. They're trying to put food on the table, pay for childcare. Some of them work 2 jobs, et cetera. So, climate and environmental justice issues aren't always at the top of their list of priorities. So what we try to do is engage folks on bread and butter issues, not just climate and environmental issues, but relate those climate and environmental issues to their health and their pocketbooks. And we also try to, as I said, do focus on community organizing and advocacy as a way of engaging people. So talking to people as we find out what their issues are, high gas bills, which have been crazy over the past year, how that relates to not only directing them to services like fuel assistance if they qualify for it, or to our energy retrofit type services so they can lower their energy bills, but also talking to them about why that bill is so high and what they could potentially do about it. So build their leadership and their confidence that they can change the conditions that impact them via education and advocacy. Most of the folks in our service area are people of color, Afro-Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, Latinos, Haitian, Creole speaking folks, et cetera. And so they're folks that haven't had a lot of, historically haven't been, well received or have, many injustices, perpetrated against them over the years. So building leadership and confidence is what the previous folks talked about, the previous speakers talked about, is just how to kind of get to know folks. Again, starting with, their health, their pocketbooks, and then just providing services. So what we have done in terms of trying to engage people in the work, we have looked at the issue of how can we engage people through providing them supports, not only things like childcare, food, obviously, feeding folks if we have evening meetings, but also creating, some payment stipends for them. We have, for example, recently engaged about 25 people from our community action series, which we did with the Fairmount CDC Collaborative. We're involved with 3 other community development corporations to do a lot of work around climate justice along the Fairmount commuter rail line that goes through all of our neighborhoods. And so that community action series was a series that we engaged people via education, just teaching them about what the government is about, who is your state rep? How many state reps are there? How many state senators are there? What are their roles? How do they get into office? How can you impact what it is that happens in your neighborhood by interacting with your legislators? So we do a lot of that type of work in terms of engagement, getting people to the point where they understand not only what the issue is that's affecting them in terms of their health and their pocketbook, but again, how they can ideally impact that issue at the systems level. So that was highly successful where we graduated these 24 or so people from this series, this community action series, where they actually went up to the State House, got a tour of the State House, met with their state reps. In the case of the community action series, where they ended up getting a $200 stipend at the end of the month and a half long training, they actually chose what they wanted to advocate for. Some of them chose that they wanted to advocate for electrification of the Fairmount line. So they did a presentation to their state reps. I think there's a link that's going to be put in the chat related to the Mass Energize website that the Fairmount CDC Collaborative set up that has to do with educating folks about how they can impact change. So from our perspective, again, it's the community organizing model, getting to know folks often through the services, but also then helping them see the connection between their service needs and how the system works and how they can impact the system. So again, making things more accessible via education and activism, payment stipends for people's time. We also implemented a mini grant program. So those folks who were interested in tackling a environmental justice issue in their community, rather it's a vacant lot that's sitting there that they want to convert maybe to some kind of small pocket park with a bench or something like that. And so, we are giving out mini grants and folks can apply, and we're helping people with the application. You don't have to have done an application before. So we're giving out, $1,000, $2,000 grants for folks to do something that's, going to support their community from an environmental justice perspective. We also, again, are deploying this model of paying people stipends to both learn and to serve their community. So we have an energy ambassador model that we're implementing. We got a grant from the Mass Clean Energy Center, and we worked with many folks in the community, including neighborhood associations, to actually recruit constituents of the neighborhood association to serve as energy ambassadors. And in return for getting a small stipend on a regular basis, they were educated on a range of energy efficiency programs. And then they were charged with going out and meeting with their neighbors and civic associations and doing tablings at various places to get the word out to their neighbors about energy retrofits. And one of the things that has come out of that energy ambassador model is that people have the one woman who is one of our strongest energy ambassadors is a homeowner, and my peers who've spoken talked about how you listen to folks as they are engaging with you, and she critiqued the very programs that she's promoting. She's saying that most of them are for low-income renters, and there's very little marketing of things like solar to BIPOC homeowners, even though there's a market for it. So it's an important factor to not only look at our communities, not to look at our communities as monolithic, even as we focus on those who are most in need based on their income. And then, we take a very collaborative approach in organizing leadership development and service. So we work with others who have good relationships with those that we seek to engage. So we've done a range of partnerships with different groups like Excel Education. We launched a green infrastructure training and certification program about 3 years ago. And Excel was really helpful in with their student population. They do a lot of wastewater management training, wastewater training. And so they we got a successful city grant last year with Excel Education, where the constituents that they recruited had to do both the wastewater management training as well as our green infrastructure training. And then at the end of both of those trainings, where they got a stipend again, we were able to support them in determining which of those fields they wanted to go into and helping them find jobs. On a collaboration model, again, in terms of engagement, we work with Union Capital Boston, and Union Capital Boston is an entity that is all about social capital and how to reward folks for being civically engaged. So their members get incentives for engagement. They get gift cards at the end of the year or after a certain number of engagement hours. So we've worked with them to engage people. And typically, people may start with, oh, I get a gift card, but then they are also very engaged in the very work that we are interested in them engaging in too. And again, I talked about how we work with our neighborhood associations. We recruited the energy ambassadors by working with the heads, the presidents of the local neighborhood association, who know most about who is in the community that might be interested in serving as an ambassador. So that's another thing. And then again, working with folks, I know I'm about to run out of time, working with folks to really engage them in not only the services, but also in creating change. And so we're in the process of creating an energy literacy curricula that we worked with the University of Michigan to do about how to read energy bills, how to, look at energy supplier options, but also want to strengthen that curricula with information about how the utility system works, how it's regulated, who to target, and how to impact systemic change. Just so we don't go out first. Codman Square is the first neighborhood in Boston to be browned out or blacked out when electricity use is high. And instead of talking about having us be resilient, we want to understand how to change that. And so again, that is how we are going about, engaging people by undertaking these organizing strategies, building relationships, and helping people see the connection between the issue that's at hand, their service need, and the bigger picture of advocacy and systems change. So I'll stop there because I'm out of time, but that's some of the ways that we do engagement.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gail. Your notes on, taking people's priorities, such as their health, into account in order to tailor communications to best communicate with them on climate change issues really resonate. And I also really loved hearing about the energy ambassador model, as well as the leadership development piece and offering stipends and mini grants to folks for them to work on initiatives they're interested in based on their experiences. And you noted lots of collaboration with various organizations, which is also very wonderful. So thank you all so very much for such wonderful introductions to the work that you do in the region and for joining us today. I see there's a question in the chat for Gail. So I'm just going to note, please join her in the breakout room to discuss there, as we'll now be heading into breakout rooms for the Q&A session. But first, I'll read some quick Zoom caretaking announcements. So let me just share my screen very quickly. Awesome. So you will be able to unmute in your breakout groups. And when you're in your groups, you won't be recorded. Just wanted to make that note again in case anyone had missed that before. So please share your name in your video if you're able, and feel free to use the chat for any questions that you want to queue up and comments throughout the discussion as well. So we will be in breakout rooms for about, for about 25 minutes, I want to say, given our time currently. So every, I'll say maybe 7 or 8 minutes, you might have the opportunity to join another breakout room if you choose to, chat with another guest speaker, ask questions to them. So I'll let you know through the little breakout room channel chat. And anytime, please let me know if you have questions about Zoom and how to move between rooms, or, having any technical difficulties, and I'll try my best to help you. So I've named the rooms after the guest speakers. I'll stop sharing and I'll open them so that you are able to join them. Let's wait and see as folks trickle in. Wonderful. I think, folks are coming in slowly, but I just want to say that I hope you have some great discussions in your breakout groups. We'll be sure to compile notes on the Q&A, and we'll share them with everyone after the event. And I know we don't have much time, but as everyone continues to come in, we'd love to ask 2 questions to all the guest speakers. Let's see. I think this is everyone. So just really quickly, I was noting that we'll compile notes from Q&A and we'll share them with everyone afterwards. And in these final moments, I just wanted to ask 2 quick questions to our guest speakers. If we can, maybe a quick 30-second answer, if you're able to. But I just love to hear, briefly about what it is in your work that brings you joy and what you're hopeful for in your work going forward.
So since I've come from a software engineering background, I feel like that paid my rent, but I always did social community work after that. For now, I'm actually get paid for doing what I love, and something that makes me feel good. That brings me joy because at the end of the day, it's nice to marry the two, and I'm not sure if everybody can do that. But also knowing that I'm getting to use my voice to represent people as much as I can, and to use my experiences to actually make people feel heard. It's funny how they say when stuff happens to you, sometimes you cringe at it, your background, growing up in South Africa. And actually I was a refugee in South Africa as well, because with political rights and things like that, things that make you cringe when you're a 12-year-old actually now make you feel proud about it. And these experiences make you have an enriched life, and you actually get to tell your story, and then people actually get to hear, and you get to change and actually help a new generation, and you let them change you too.
I think we're next.
Yeah. So something that brings me joy in this work is really just being able to provide a space for folks to have a seat at the table when decisions are being made that will directly impact them. And then something that I hope for going forward is I dream of multiple CETs everywhere, not just in Cambridge, but like, I think this is a great model that could really help our Black and brown folks that really need to be included when decisions are being made.
Something, oh, that's beautiful. Something that brings me joy in this work is that the endless curiosity and connection and mutual support that our teams give each other and us. The demographics of our teams, as you might admit, or as you might guess, are really different than the demographics of the city staff at large. And I'm really proud of the fact that we've created spaces where the culture is really different and really about trust and connection and community. And so that brings me endless joy. And my hope is similar to Lindsay's. I hope that this work becomes standard and normal, and that we continue to see it expand and grow in creative, amazing, and dynamic, equitable, anti-racist, responsive ways, joyful ways. Thank you.
And for me, what's both joyful and hopeful is the commitment, and what my previous speakers have said, the commitment of those who are engaged. That gives me a lot of joy. And I have this concept of an equity army, developing an equity army. And, and that's part of that commitment and that vision of seeing a mass of people who kind of, say this is what we want and this is how we're going to get it. And we're not going to take no for an answer. And the hopeful part of it is the young folks who are involved, who are demanding that their voices be heard and are pushing for systemic change. That's all of the hope and the joy that I have. Thank you for the invitation.
Amazing. Thank you all for those really beautiful answers. We're all continuing to learn more and more in this work. So I'm excited to continue this journey with you all. And so to close out, I just want to say thank you again to everyone who joined us today. Please be on the lookout for our final event in the next few months. We'll be focusing on creating more equitable access to clean energy technologies. So check out our website for recordings and resources. And, we would love some feedback on the event. So if you have 2 minutes, please fill out the survey we'll include in the chat. And yeah, thanks again to everyone who joined us, Kumar, Christian, and our wonderful guest speakers, Niri, Marlees, Lindsay, and Gail for joining us this afternoon. I know we went a little over, so thank you all and take care.